for inviting us to speak at this webinar. So first of all, I would really like to say that this is a highly collaborative effort. Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, I'm hearing a lot of reflection on my side. I just wonder how is the sound quality?
Yeah, we heard too.
We heard the feedback as well. It seems to be going okay right now.
Okay, good. Okay, so yeah, I hope. Is it fine now? Should I just continue?
I think so.
Okay, cool. So I guess I'll just jump in. So today, I guess I can safely assume that for most of you here, Flint is no new story. So a brief recap of what happened. This Flint water crisis it happened almost 2 years ago when the city of Flint, in an effort to save money, stopped buying water from Detroit and then started to treat its own water. And the corrosivity of this new water caused lead to leach into water. And not only that, there is also a spike in a deadly disease outbreak and caused massive leaks all across the city. So quoting one of the latest articles on Flint by Time magazine, what happened to Flint is one simple story. A city got poisoned because the state government screwed up. So the crisis is not only caused by ignorant engineering decision, but moreover, it is actually more importantly, is caused by uncaring public servants who are paid to protect the public but fail to do their job. So today, I would like to share with you our team's first-hand involvement from the beginning and where Flint is today in resolving the issue and possibly the future and some good that can come out of this tragedy. So first, to understand the technical part, I'd like to start with explaining briefly on where lead may come from in a distribution system. So typically, lead is presented at a very negligible amount in natural aquatic environments, and there's essentially no lead in a living water treatment plant. However, the main source of lead leaching into our drinking water source is the lead service lines that connect houses to the water mains. In other words, one is more likely to get lead poison from drinking tap water than straight from a pristine lake or river. Or put it in another words, if you have a lead service line to your home, it's comparable to drinking water through a giant lead straw. And in Flint, an estimated 50% of the homes have a lead service lines. And in addition to the lead service lines, lead can also come from the building plumbing devices such as lead shoulders and lead in brass. Which until very recently can contain up to 8% of lead and still be labeled as lead-free. So it is very unlikely that houses built before the ban would still have lead shoulders and other lead building plumbing fixtures. And before the city of Flint switched to Flint River water, Flint has been purchasing water from the city of Detroit. And the water had good corrosion control chemicals added to it to keep the lead that was in these plumbing fixtures and out of the water. So there wasn't much cause for concern. However, when Flint switched to this more corrosive water from Flint River without knowing better, everything changed. Here is a table comparing the key corrosion-related water chemistry parameters before and after the switch. As you can see that chloride levels in the new water increased by almost 5 times after the switch, and making this critical CSMR, which is chloride to sulfate mass ratio, to be 3 times higher than the recommended value 0.5. And furthermore, no corrosion inhibitors was added. So here we have a water with no corrosion control combined with an extremely corrosive water chemistry. This called for a perfect recipe for a perfect storm for lead leaching into water, especially for an old city like Flint with an enormous amount of lead service lines. And in fact, at that time, corrosion in Flint was so bad that the city will experience much higher rates of water main breaks as a result of corrosion than they used to do when they were on Detroit water. And this also caused permanent damages to their most inaccessible underground water pipes. And the citizens of Flint actually immediately knew something was wrong with their water, because these are the pictures that was taken at that time. On the lower left corner, you can see that the water coming out of that shower taps was reddish brown as a result of the iron mains being eaten away by the corrosive water. And also, the citizens started to develop unexplained adverse health symptoms. They started to experience much higher rates of skin infections, unexplained headaches, and their kids started to act out possibly because of lead poisoning. So it doesn't take an expert to know that the water was not safe. However, the city and the state officials, relying solely on information provided by MDEQ, which is the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, the same people who neglected to add corrosion control to the water kept insisting that the Flint water is safe to drink. And in fact, General Motors, which was a major buyer of the city's drinking water, also immediately noticed the change in water quality because their engine parts are being eaten away, are corroded by the water. And so even they stopped buying water from Flint immediately. So among all the concerned citizens, one of the first citizens who reached out is Mrs. Leon Waters. Here's a picture of her. So the city came and tested her water 3 times, and all the time found high levels of lead. However, they simply dismissed the results and attributed the high lead levels to the fact that she must have lead in her plumbing devices. However, Mrs. Leon Waters kept explaining to him that they had remodeled their house and replaced all the metal pipes, but MDEQ, they just wouldn't help her. So Mrs. Waters had to contact the environmental protection agencies in District 5 and was put into contact with one of their research scientists, Mr. Miguel Del Toro. And when Mrs. Miguel Del Toro went to Waters' house and inspected the house, he only found plastic pipes, just as Mrs. Waters had told the state. So then Mrs. Miguel Del Toro and Mrs. Waters reached out to Dr. Mark Edwards, and they sent us samples from her house to analyze. And when we had the results, we were extremely alarmed. Here is a summary of the first samples we got from Mrs. Waters' house. On average, her house had almost 130 times more lead than the EPA regulated action level 15 ppb. And as you can see that in the worst case, the samples had nearly 1,000 times more. To give you a more concrete idea, lead levels above 5,000 ppb would be labeled as hazardous waste, solid waste levels, the levels that you'd expect to find at a Superfund site. And this, we're seeing even much worse lead results in someone's home. So after we shared this data with Mr. Del Toro, he immediately drafted a memo to his EPA colleagues to express his concern of the lead found in Mrs. Waters' house and to raise the alarm about this major concern for public health in Flint. However, no one responded and nothing happened immediately. Instead of calling for action, Mr. Del Toro actually found himself silenced by EPA and was publicly discredited by the state, which called him a rogue agent, acting outside his job. And these are the exact words EPA used. Well, in fact, he was actually doing his job. So the people in Flint, meanwhile, kept trying to get their elected officials to understand that the water they were told safe to drink, to give to their children, was in fact not safe. But the state told everyone who was worried about the lead in water to relax and simply dismiss the concern of the public on no grounds at all. At one point, MDQ even bragged to Mrs. Waters that Miguel had been handled. So, observing this very dangerous attitude, we knew that the people in Flint needed help, and if we can get involved, we could at least supply some funding, some analytical support, and some science to help the people in Flint to determine if their water was in fact safe. So then in mid-July last year, we went all in for Flint. And this Flint Water Study team was born. A team consists of over 30 graduate and undergraduate students, postdocs, research scientists, and professors, led by Professor Mark Edwards, to give credibility and scientific support to the citizens in Flint. And the first thing we did was to send 300 lead sampling kits to the citizens in Flint to let them collect waters from their home. And this would give us the quickest ways to collect as much data as possible. And meanwhile, to make sure the Flint citizens are well informed on appropriate sampling procedures, we provided instructions both on paper and via video demonstrations to make sure the sampling procedure was carried out to the highest standard. And you can still find the video on YouTube made by one of our postdoc students, William Rhodes. So for the results from the first round of sampling, we got 271 samples back from the 300 sampling kits we sent out. And our first draw 90th percentile lead levels was 26.8 ppb, which was almost two times higher than the EPA regulated action level, 15 ppb. And in the highest first draw, the levels was 158 ppb, and the highest overall samples was over 1,000 ppb. And this was the water the Flint people was drinking, was used to fill up their morning coffee, to do everything. And we'll also realize that the data we collected might not even represent the worst case scenario, as the sampling was done at random, and probably a lot of people who are actually cut off from the media and the news was not even included in this round of sampling. And we were very alarmed and startled. So after we had these results analyzed, Mark Edwards was very concerned, and immediately went to Flint to share our results on open science, taking an open science approach. And he reported that there are 2 zip codes in the cities with particularly high lead levels, where 1 in 5 homes in that 2 zip code had elevated lead levels above the action level. We thought this would be a turning point, but unfortunately we were wrong at that time. And all this time, MDEQ just continued to claim that the water was not corrosive. So to further corroborate our field sampling data, we decided to run experiments ourselves in the lab to compare the corrosivity of the Flint water to Detroit water. So for these lead corrosion experiments, we use copper pipes. We use copper pipes. Those are the coupons you saw in those 2 water bottles, and copper pipes with lead solders, which contain 50% of lead, and put them in both Detroit water and Flint water. And at the end of 3 weeks, we saw that Flint water has 19 times more lead than Detroit water. So if you look closely at those 2 bottles label and the white particle, and you can see those white particles in the bottle label was Flint water was in fact lead particles leached from the solder. So after seeing our results, a pediatrician from Hurley Medical Center in Flint, Dr. Mona Hanna-Tischer, also released her independent study showing that blood lead levels in children in Flint had increased significantly since the switch to Flint River. So here we have another strong piece of evidence to drive the change. And at the same time, the public and the social media started to step in to uncover the tragedy, and the Flint water crisis started to make to the front pages of all the major news channels. So after months and months of neglect, finally help has come for Flint in the form of bottled waters and filters. And then finally in January, a federal emergency was declared in Flint, with President Obama came and saying, I know if I was a parent up here in Flint, I would be beside myself if my kids' health could be at risk. And then in October last year, the state then had to spend over $12 million to switch back to Detroit water. But this is not an instant fix, because the corrosive Flint water has destroyed a protective layer on the inside of the pipes, and now, even now, the water is reconnected back to Detroit water. It still takes time for pipe to heal and to reform that protective layer on the inner linings of the pipes. And no one could tell exactly how long this would take and how bad the damage was. So now I would like to talk a little bit more about to highlight the sampling trips we made to Flint and our experiences while we were in Flint. Since the state officials and the media at that time had been questioning about the water Flint citizens were sending to us, because they believed that the citizens and the residents would put lead in their drinking waters just to draw attention to themselves. So, so we decided that we needed to go to Flint ourselves and took samples ourselves, as well as to meet the people and talk to them. So here is a summary of the 4 main sampling trips we took to Flint so far. This slide showed a summary of all the key physical, chemical, as well as biological parameters we were able to collect and test for the water samples. And yeah, and also as a result of the of driving down to Flint, we were also able to collect a lot more biological samples, which are more time sensitive, and to assess the microbial the concerns for microbial pathogens. So the first sampling trip was done last year, August, and frankly, this round of sampling was done in a semi-secretive fashion because of the very intense circumstances. So a group of students from our lab just packed our sampling kits and then drove off to Flint in Mark's personal minivan. And this aim of this trip was to do a random citywide sampling of the entire distribution system. And here is a map of all the major sampling points we did. And as you can see, that it's widespread and aim to give a representative view of the status of the distribution system at that time. And here is a picture showing when we filtered the water we collected from the Flint, and you can see that the filters was white, but then after the filtration, there's a lot of undesirable stuffs in that water. And the second sampling trip was focusing more on the elevated levels of bacterial pathogens in the contaminated water. So we sampled and identified hotspot buildings where a lot of disease outbreaks were reported. And this picture of brown water coming out of the tap was taken while I was sampling at a hospital faucet. And even though I had been working with Flint samples before the trip in the lab, I was still beyond words when I saw this brown water coming out of a tap in a hospital where the most vulnerable people are supposed to be taken care of. And one of the bacteria we were particularly concerned about was the pathogen known as Legionella, which causes a severe and sometimes fatal form of pneumonia known as Legionnaires Disease. This disease tends to impact immunocompromised population like children and the elderly. And unlike traditional waterborne pathogens, you don't typically get Legionnaires disease by drinking the water, but rather by inhaling the aerosolized water vapor containing the bacteria. So it means that even if you are not drinking the water, you still have a very high risk of contracting the disease. And actually, one of the most common ways people get infected of this disease is in the shower. And in fact, Legionella is also becoming one of the leading causes of drinking water disease outbreak in the U.S. and other developed countries. So back in August, when we tried to submit a proposal to the National Science Foundation to back up our work in Flint, even though we did not have information about the outbreak of Legionnaires disease at that point, we hypothesized that the catastrophic conditions in the Flint system could lead to a perfect storm that has the ideal conditions for growth of bacteria like Legionella in pipes. And unfortunately, this was a hypothesis that turned out to be true. There are three main reasons behind our hypothesis. The first is that there is abundance of nutrients that support bacterial growth present in the Flint River water. And the second is the abundance of iron because as a result of the corrosion of the iron water mains. So this and also we all know that a degraded water combined with a higher iron in the water would cause a rapid loss of disinfectant residues in the distribution system. So which would then left bacteria in the water to regrow. And just as we had hypothesized, Legionella then became a problem for Flint. There were a total of 87 cases of Legionnaires disease and 10, I think now is 11 deaths at that time when Flint was on Flint River water. And as you can see, the timeline of the disease outbreak, the cases, the spike in the cases started immediately after the city switched to Flint River water. And these outbreaks were quite unique and also significant in the sense that, as far as we know, they are the first, if not one of the first, examples of major Legionnaires disease outbreaks caused by rampant, widespread, and corrosion-related infrastructure damage of a city's drinking water distribution system. And they are also very big in terms of the numbers when compared to other historical major Legionnaires disease outbreaks in the U.S. Especially if we normalize the number of cases by the population size of the city. As shown on the red bar charts here, during the crisis, an average Flint citizen was about 8 times more likely to contract Legionnaires disease than an average American. And furthermore, concerned about the implication of the lack of disinfectant residues and bacterial regrowth, besides testing for lead and Legionella, we also run a list of other microbiological tests for a list of potentially harmful bacteria shown here. Most of them are like fecal indicators and other opportunistic pathogens and corrosion-related bacteria. And in general, we did see a lot of bacteria related to corrosion. For example, here we did a quick test of the BART test comparing pure water with Flint water, and the color differences between the top row and the second row indicates a high abundance of corrosion-related bacteria in Flint River water. And here are the 5 main groups that were tested, which include iron-reducing bacteria, sulfate-reducing bacteria, and also slime-forming bacteria. So as we mentioned that healing of the pipes takes time. So even now the city is now back on Detroit water. We still wonder when the water would actually be safe for people to drink. So we then continued to go back to Flint to assess the lead levels in the water. And so far, we have had 2 rounds of monitoring sampling trips this year. One happened in March and one just ended a few weeks ago. And here's a summary of the results. We're actually very glad to see that both the 90th percentile lead levels and the percent of non-detectable lead samples have been improving. As of our most recent sampling, the 90th percentile lead levels, the figure you see on the left, is now below the EPA action level 15 ppb. It's slightly below the 15 ppb action level. So we can see that it is now possible to say that Flint is meeting the lead compliance regulation. However, we would also like to stress that this sampling effort is just a self-organized effort based on Flint citizens' voluntary participation. So it is not designed to identify the worst-case lead leaching scenarios as mandated by the EPA lead and copper root sampling protocol, which is supposed to sample the worst-case scenarios. So while it is reassuring to see that the lead and iron levels had been decreasing since Flint switched back to Detroit water, the citizens are still advised to continue to use lead filters or bottled waters as their potable water supply until further conclusive notice from the state or EPA. And so besides the efforts to optimize water chemistry, there is also active plan to tackle the bigger issue of this damaged and aging water pipes in Flint. So the city of Flint has hopes to replace all the lead service lines and has a hope to take this opportunity to actually remodel the city and to make Flint a model city in terms of dealing with this aging water infrastructure. However, this is definitely no easy task. The lead replacement program definitely requires a great deal of money first of all, and on top of that, there's also a lot of engineering expertise and logistic support needed. And one of the most eminent and great impediment facing the lead replacement program at this moment is actually the lack of data to show where exactly the lead pipes are. So based on the report, the engineering, the contractor who are a lot of times when the engineering companies dig up the ground and trying to replace the pipes, they actually found copper pipes, or a lot of times they would just miss, they were having some problems and hard time at identifying where those lead pipes are. And meanwhile, Virginia Tech has been hired by the EPA to continue to do more runs of sampling to monitor the water and also to inform the residents when it is safe to drink the water again. So as we all understand that this crisis is definitely much bigger than just the technical failures, and there are people who had to be held responsible for what they did. So far, there are 9 criminal charges against the state and government officials involved in this case, and there are ongoing trials, and the trials are ongoing. So on closing note, I would like to take a step back to maybe bring you to contemplate on this bigger picture of this aging water infrastructure issue facing not only U.S. but a lot of developed countries. So according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, our infrastructure is crumbling and rated our water infrastructure a failing grade D. And some of our pipes are over 100 years old and way beyond their designed lifespan. And it's estimated that it would take over $1 trillion in the next 25 years to upgrade all the aging pipes. And when it comes to lead, there are definitely, as we have seen, there are definitely forces out there that are trying to weaken this current lead and copper compliance rule. And we, as engineers and as a society together, definitely cannot allow this to happen. And last but not least, I would like to just say that these are the people from the left, Mrs. Leon Waters, Mr. Miguel Taro, Dr. Mona Hanna-Tischer, and Mark Edwards. These are the people who stopped and reversed the crisis, despite being told that they were powerless, they were a rogue employee, or having their data come under fire. So these are the people who I look up to when I am preparing myself as a young engineer. And finally, I would also like to emphasize again that this whole endeavor is definitely a highly collaborative effort by many dedicated players. And here is a list of the players we would like to thank. And thank you. And that's all for my presentation. And if we have time, I would be happy to answer any question.
Thank you, Joyce. If anybody has any questions, please type your question into the chat box, and we will answer them in the order that they are received. Okay, Joyce, we have our first comment from Jane Keithley. What an amazing story. Thank you for presenting it.
Oh, thank you, for this opportunity to share. I hope, this is not a too depressing story.
So we have a question from Jane. What are the anticipated health issues for those who drink the water?
So, I mean, right now, of course, as you can see, that it was estimated that almost first of all, it's definitely the exposure from lead. Like, it was estimated that during that 14 months when Flint was on Flint River water, it was estimated that almost all the people in Flint was at one time exposed to exposure to lead. And we all know that lead poison is chronic, and once you are being poisoned, the effect will stay, and it's a lifelong impact. And I would say that the major health burden is also definitely on kids, because we know that kids are impacted the most by lead, and the adverse impact from lead poisoning is permanent. So this huge, then for those kids and families impacted by lead poisoning, this lifelong health burden is permanent and will stay with them probably for the rest of their life. And other than that, there are also, like as I mentioned, there are 100 cases of Legionnaires disease, and those are more like acute, like pneumonia. So those can be healed if they are treated properly and promptly. But this also represents a huge medical concern and medical burden. So that would be the so far the two most prominent health concerns. But there are, as I briefly mentioned in the presentation, there was also a lot of unexplained medical complications such as headaches, and even now citizens are still reporting they have skin rashes and due to suspect, and there's so far no conclusive explanations to those unexplained skin rashes, and we just suspect it's a result of, in general, of the degraded water and their immune systems. So yeah, there's still a lot of unanswered questions, but lead and Legionella are definitely the two top priority health burdens to fight at this moment.
Okay, we have another question. What EPA requirements were changed after investigating the Flint water crisis?
EPA requirements. As far as I am aware, there is no major change to the EPA regulation or rules. The major EPA regulation governing this lead in water rule was the lead and copper rule. So there is a regulation that's saying that if the more than the 90th percentile lead levels in the tested homes or above 15 ppb, the water utilities has to do something to definitely bring down the level. So far, this is still the main regulations Flint is trying to achieve, and that's also how we are comparing our lead sampling results against. So at this moment, the short-term goal is definitely for Flint to even meet this lead and copper rule.
Okay, we have another question. Will all delivery pipes, street and to the house, have to be replaced? If so, what type of pipes are used as replacement? How long will the replacement take?
I see. No. So if you can recall one of my slides, so typically the distribution system comprised of two parts: the water mains, which is what maybe you referred as the street piping, and the house plumbing piping, which is the smaller pipes that connect the water mains to the house. So usually the water mains, most of the water mains in Flint is made of iron pipes. So it's cast iron pipes. So those pipes usually don't contain any lead. But if the water is corrosive, those pipes would corrode the water mains and cause pipe leaks, water main leaks, and that's definitely undesirable. But the main cause for lead in their water is the lead service lines that connect the water mains to the house. So at this stage, the goal of the lead replacement program is to replace the lead service lines that connect the water mains to the house. And as I mentioned, that because of historical negligence of the lack of the documentation of where the lead service lines are, like which houses has the lead service lines. So right now, the replacement program is more like a hit and miss game. So they just have their best educated guess on where the lead service lines are, and then engineering firms, contractors will go and try to dig up some houses and to see if it has the lead service lines. So that has been a huge impediment to this whole lead service line replacement program. So it will be hard to estimate when a very exact timeline for this lead service replacement program to complete. And on top of the technical difficulties, there is also issues of financial difficulties, like where is this whole replacement program indeed requires a lot of money, and as we all know, Flint is not the richest city in the U.S. So that has the money has been causing some delay in this program. So yeah, I sincerely don't have an answer to how the timeline of this program. Yeah, that's.
All right, it looks like that's all the questions we have for you today, Joyce. I want to thank you for your presentation. It was very informative, and we really appreciate you presenting to our section.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.